Yes, welcome into the camp. We are back, and the Badgers are back in Madison. They were back on the field this morning inside Camp Randall Stadium for the first time in fall camp, having completed their 2 weeks down in Platteville. Jesse, I know what Luke Fickell said the other night, that things may change when they get back to campus, but Tyler Van Dyke, still the first-team quarterback and still the guy taking all of those reps, just like he was on Sunday night. So
You're not saying, you're just saying.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Not that, like, again, this is not a huge surprise. It's just, and we get to talk to the quarterbacks on Wednesday. So, and Phil Longo. So we'll have a little bit. That is correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we will have a chance to. I don't know if we'll get what we'll get out of those guys, but we'll get to hear from them on Wednesday and have a little bit more to talk about when it comes to those guys. But before we joined here, you kind of mentioned it was a bit of a practice.
Only from the sense of, if you're looking for new details or things we haven't seen before, that was lacking. They still did a lot of scrimmage action, some live tackling action, and those are part of what they're trying to ramp up, obviously, as they get ready for year two. But it's most of the same people in the same places, and certainly Tyler Van Dyke still using all of his snaps with the first team offense is notable because, like we talked about previously, it has felt as though it was trending in that direction before. And at a certain point, you have to make a decision. And while Luke said after practice in Platteville Sunday night that there's still chances for them to switch things up, the closer you get to the season opener, the more you're really trying to lock in on who's going to be in what role.
Yep. And again, we'll get into all of it. We'll also talk a little bit about Wisconsin being unranked for the first time since 2016. And can they potentially do what they did in 2016, which was a heck of a gauntlet of a schedule that they faced that turned out to maybe not be as good, but still was really, really good. We'll talk about that. We also had a chance to talk with the safeties. We'll hear a little bit of what they had to say today and, again, talk what we saw at practice. But before we do that, I wanted to, again, remind everybody that Home Field is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have the best vintage gear that you can possibly get when it comes to college athletics, and they are back in a big way with their Can't Miss Kickoff campaign that's running throughout the month of August, and they have these platinum football boxes that they just released last Friday. They are ridiculous. They do have a Wisconsin box that has 3 new shirts in them, and I, again, particularly like the one that highlights the 1993 team, one of the more beloved teams in school history. So make sure to check that out. You can find it up on homefield.com, and if you use the code Bucky24, you can get 15% off your first purchase. All right, back to practice here. I thought that there were a couple of people that stood out. I thought Tyler Van Dyke actually did throw the ball pretty well. Some guys maybe weren't making all the catches they needed to, but I thought he actually threw the ball pretty well, and the passing game had its moments, maybe not down the field necessarily, but it was also really good to see Tawee Walker back because he had missed a few days, and when he's in there, and Chez Mellusi actually got some work too. That 1-2 combination looked really good today. So I don't know which way you want to go with this, but I know we've talked a ton about the passing game. Haven't talked a ton about Chez and Tawee of late.
Yeah, I know I got some questions for my previous mailbag at The Athletic about Chez, and we just had not seen him a lot since the first few days of week 1, but he was back Sunday night for that scrimmage, obviously ramping up, full go now, and that's an encouraging sign. I think the Mellusi-Walker combination has a chance to be really dynamic, even when you get into some of these tough Big Ten games, and Walker looks like one of the steals, frankly, of the transfer portal haul that they've had, largely because you didn't necessarily know what his role was going to be. There was a run today where I think the ball was on the defense's 38-yard line, and he hit a hole, and nobody was around him, and it would have been a touchdown run. I think they spotted the ball on the next play to 20 or something like that.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me.
That's why it's always tough, but I could see how excited and fired up Devin Spalding was when Walker got to the sideline. He's just been that dude since the spring. And we talked about this on Sunday, the number of players that they have to evaluate that could be legitimate contributors is substantial. I mean, legitimately 6 guys, which we've mentioned, the Jackson Aker, Cade Yakimelli, and of course, Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones, who continue to get some reps with the 2s. So it's a very good group. And Obviously a lot of the focus since Longo got here has been on the passing game and what can be different, but he is consistently relying on the run game, and that is as important as anything to the success of this offense.
To me, that's the biggest question. They were essentially 50-50 last year, run and pass. I I feel like, and Luke Fickell has talked about this, wanting to have that mindset and still be that team. And I know Phil bristles at the idea that he's a pass guy. He's going to take what the defense gives you, but I think they're going to have to. I think they should at least early on lean on that running game. I feel better about the passing game than I did last year, but if teams are going to, for lack of a better term, just not take that away, you have to take advantage of it. And for you, a question for you: what do you think teams will concentrate on more this year? Badgers running game or their passing game?
Well, I mean, I think what they showed last year and what they had this year means that it's got to be pretty close to 50-50 because that's what they're going to throw out there. I think I look at the pass game and I think a lot of what we'll see, what I would anticipate are short, intermediate type throws. And the short throws are essentially runs. They're just getting the ball to, I mean, you might even, that's how you get the ball to your tailback to start out with. Obviously, Mellusi, what he's put on film means that you've got to focus on him. But if defenses stop the run, you're putting Wisconsin in a very difficult position, which is what we could have said about the previous Wisconsin iteration of Wisconsin football. So, I mean, if I have to answer the question, and obviously not hedge, Zach, which I would never do, I would say it's stop the run first and make this team show you that they can win a game through the air, because even though there were more passes last year than what we're accustomed to seeing, I don't know that you can point to many games where you said they won that game because they went to the air. They beat Illinois in a comeback because Braden Locke made some great throws. Tanner Mordecai's best game was against LSU, where the offense did very well, and yet they still lost the game. So that would kind of be my thought process as defense coming in.
Yeah, again, I think it's a tough question because they are 50-50, but I agree, and I think this was the case last year. Prove you can beat us with your passing game. Prove it. And we're gonna stop the run. This is what we're gonna do. I will also say I think there's a lot of defenses that are in Wisconsin's this same way. Stop the run, then get after them on third down, and that's the key and the key to success. But if you're keen on it, if your goal for a team is, we're going to make sure that Tyler Van Dyke or whoever the quarterback is has to beat us, I think that is probably at least until they proves that they can. Until you prove that you can, then we're going to make you test it. So, that's the thing. I think the running game should be better than it was last year, in large part because you have more options in the backfield. But I think also the offensive line is one year deeper into this. But with a healthy Chez, Mellusi, and a healthy Braylon Allen, I thought the running game could have been pretty darn good last year. Unfortunately for them, they just were never truly, truly healthy throughout the entire season. You lose Chez in game 4. Braylon's dinged up for much of it. This year, if the top two go down, they have some options there to help them through it. But do you feel the same way about the running game as I do? Do you think that it'll be better than it was last year?
Yes. I kind of feel like, though, if the injuries happen, all bets are off, because then you're banking on the guys that you ended up banking on last season and freshmen who, while have had moments in practice, are completely unproven in a game. But we felt this last year, especially at the time when Mellusi got hurt, which was so unfortunate for him, that he was the best fit among all the running backs for what they wanted out of that position. I think Walker certainly has that good combination of some of the power that you saw from Braylon, but obviously good speed. And there's just an opportunity for them to be more dynamic. And there's a greater comfort level too. You're talking about the offensive line. Everybody feels more confident that was here last year and is back in what they can accomplish, because there's less thinking going on and more reacting.
Yep. On the other side of the ball, I know we're going to talk about the safeties, but I thought it continues to show up ball hawking, and not just ball hawking. When you think about that, you think interceptions and pass breakups, and there were pass breakups today, but I think they have done as good a job as I've ever seen from a secondary, at least in fall camp, of going and attacking the ball when a guy's running with it. We saw it the other night with Will Pauling getting the ball knocked out of his hand. We saw it in the first practice where guys, where there was just a ton of turnovers. But today, Bryson Green, Austin Brown knocked it free from him as he was going down the field. Again, we have to temper the excitement about that because the offense is also not holding on to the ball. But the way that the defense has attacked it, I think, was certainly something they wanted to do, and they have definitely accomplished that to this point in fall camp. There's been a ton of those situations where guys are getting their hands on balls and knocking them free, kind of like the old Peanut Tillman punch, and the ball's been on the ground a bunch.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't Austin Brown the one who knocked the ball out of Pauling's hands?
It might have been.
Yeah. Look, they've got a really quality secondary. So we can save the safety conversation for a little bit since we had a chance to talk to them, the corners and the safeties. I agree with you. I've seen a lot of pass breakups too. And that has definitely stood out. And it's not just the usual suspects, Nazir Forkerin, Ricardo Hallman. Even guys with the twos are really getting after it. Jonas Duclona. Xavier Lucas had a great play today that stood out and I'm still getting used to it because kind of got thrown in there. He's number 6, and I'm looking at my roster going, who is this? Just because he hasn't been the guy that's been in the 2 deep since day 1 of preseason, but it's noticeable when he's out there. There was a play where I think it was like the front right corner of the end zone, and he made a play on it and just showed no fear, demonstrated that physicality and that size. And when you've got that coming from a freshman and he's getting 2 reps, it means that the guys in front of him are making those plays as well. So they definitely look much deeper and more consistent. But if you find out in the games whether you can do that at a level that's going to mean you can win those games and they can be difference makers.
Yeah, he also had an interception, maybe. The official said it was an interception, Xavier Lucas, that is. It was very close to being out of bounds, but either way, he had an interception as well. He's going to play. He's got to play at some point. And I know you think about what Ricardo Hallman gave you last year and Nazir Forkerin and then RJ Delancey. But after that, as we've talked about before, there's not a ton of experience there. So other guys so it's not like he's way behind Jonas Duclona or Jace Arnold. And that has certainly played out here these last 3 practices where he's been getting reps with the twos. And it feels like he's out there even more than those other 2 guys. It feels it feels like they are rotating and he's getting one side to himself every time.
I think he's going to get snaps this season. It's notable that, again, all of a sudden he emerges with the twos during a scrimmage on Sunday and getting a lot of reps and then continues to get more of those. And we've seen a lot of 2 reps, certainly from Jace Arnold, Jonas Duclona, Amari Snowden has gotten in there as well. But especially for a true freshman who is beginning to ascend, we're only 2 weeks into fall camp. So how much better can he be, say, 2 weeks from now when you're getting ready for the first game? I certainly think that he'll be there. And that is why Luke Fickell mentioned a half dozen freshmen. Xavier Lucas was in the conversation that we got to figure out a way to get him on the field.
Yeah. And Amari Snowden did have another interception today as well in Skelly. So he's found his hands on the ball quite a bit these first couple of weeks of camp. Do you want to talk about the safeties? Let's talk about the safeties here a little bit. Obviously, Hunter Wohler is the guy. They've had a bunch of other guys along with him back there, Preston Zachman, Austin Brown. We'll see where, Kamoi Latu is when he is cleared. He's been in a yellow no contact jersey. I wonder if some of that is to protect him from himself at times, just because he's just so physical. And, when he doesn't have that yellow no contact jersey on, he's just flying around and getting his hands, punching balls loose. And I think that may have been one of those issues for him, and why he's not practicing right now is so he's got that yellow no contact jersey on. But Alex Grinch said that they expect him back and he'll work his way through whatever he's working his way through. But the other guys, if you were to say right now, Hunter Wohler's your guy, one guy, who's your other guy?
It'd be Austin Brown, assuming that Max Lofi's in the slot, and we have seen that the majority of the time, but there are instances where they do put Brown in the slot, which is what we expected coming into the preseason. And in that situation, you can go any number of guys. If Latu is healthy, he's there. Preston Zachman, Braden Moore, I think, has made significant strides here. So they've got a lot of options, but to me, it's what we've seen most of the time, where it is Brown and Wohler, and that is a pretty darn good combination back there.
So you got a chance to talk with Hunter Wohler a little bit today, one-on-one. I saw that. We were waiting for him to stop talking to you.
15 seconds. You waited 15 seconds. I made sure that it was the last question so everyone didn't have to wait.
So what were some of the things that you're interested in, that you were interested in asking him about? Because I think he usually gives some really good answers to the questions, especially when it's after a Northwestern game and he is upset with the locker room. But obviously that was not the case this time.
I was asking him more big picture questions about the team because as a leader and a representative of the program, like at Big Ten Media Days, he can kind of speak to that. So it wasn't specific to the things that he's improved, which we talked to him a lot about back in the spring. But I mean, he's a guy who came in, who grew up in this state and watched all the success this program had. And as soon as he got here, even slightly before, the program went this way. So how do you get back to that level? And do you feel like this is a year that is really important to trying to do that? Obviously, he's going to say that it is. But for all these veterans, they came at a time when there were a lot of high hopes for where this program could go. And it has not gone the way that anybody thought. So Hunter has a lot of motivation, just like a lot of other guys do, to try and turn that around and put this program on a better path, which is certainly what Luke Fickell wants to do as well in year 2 for him.
Do you think they have the guys to do that? Do you think they do have the guys to turn and start the upward trajectory? And what does that look like?
It's such a hard question to answer. I think we've said before, they are more talented than they were a year ago. And you asked on the previous show, if you go down most position groups, I think based on what we've seen, we feel like you could say there is more talent in those rooms. It's going to take doing something that we just have not seen Wisconsin teams do in recent years, which is winning those games that people think you're not going to win, frankly. Wisconsin was so good for so long because the Badgers won the winnable games and the toss-up games. And maybe they could squeak out another one of those games that you didn't think they would win. And all of a sudden you have a 10-win season and you are in the Big Ten championship game. And then it got to a point where they started sliding and were losing to teams that they were not supposed to lose to. And it's hard to get that back. But I think obviously with the moves they made in the portal, the freshmen they brought in, the guys that have bought in that are coming back in year 2, it feels possible. It's just that you got to go out and prove it. And if you win at home against Alabama in week 3, it completely changes the narrative around the program. It changes the trajectory of what year 2 can be. And you go from being a team that is what people expect might be 7-5 and just lose the games that people think you're going to lose to, can you be a legitimate college football playoff contender? I think that is how much 1 week can change what people think about this program, whether that's fair or not.
Is that a barometer as to where the program is? Do you think that game on the 14th, September 14th, so like a month away?
It is certainly a barometer. It's not the barometer. Like if they lose that game, then I think you just feel like, oh, this is what was expected. But if you play reasonably well and build enough confidence that you come off the bye week and beat USC on the road and have a pretty good season, this can be a good place for this program to take a leap. But yeah, I mean, you beat a top 5 team, especially Alabama. It changes so much. And that's, I think, part of what the beauty of college football is to me. For as much as everything has changed in the landscape, and there are a lot of things that are different and that people may not like, every week is an indictment on where you are as a program and where you stand. And some of those weeks are bigger than others. And week 3 is one of those that if you win that game, it means so much, even if it doesn't count toward Big Ten championship. It does count toward what I think has become the greater goal of trying to get into the college football playoff, because now you're at a point where you don't even have to win a Big Ten championship or be within striking distance in the last week or two, and yet you can still be a college football playoff contender.
I think that game is going to be maybe not a barometer, but it's a measuring stick as to where the program is. If they put up a fight and take that game into the fourth quarter, then I think you're probably thinking it's moving in the right direction. If it's like the last time they played them, where they put up a fight maybe in the first half and then Alabama kind of took over in the second when it was down in Dallas, then maybe you're expectations or your feelings about where things are going maybe are on the other side of it. But it's definitely a measuring stick as to where things are in year two for me.
Yeah, I think back to the Ohio State game from last year, where at the time it felt like, oh, maybe this program is making some strides. It's a tie game in the third quarter. It's a 1 touchdown game going into the fourth. They lose it by 2 touchdowns. And I mean, was it? I mean, they obviously had a terrible stretch during the season. And so it can go both ways. Like you can play reasonably competitive and lose and still not meet the standard in subsequent weeks. But it can also be a moment that galvanizes the program and does change things. So we'll have to see. It's coming up quick.
It is. It's about a month away from Alabama coming to Camp Randall. We're only about 2 weeks out, 2.5 weeks out from the start of the season against Western Michigan. Wisconsin will go into this season unranked for the first time since 2016, and just the second time, I think, since 2009. Either way, it is it's unfamiliar territory, but it's also, I think, probably expected after what has taken place these last 3 or 4 years. At some point, your reputation as being a perennial contender goes away, and that is certainly it's gone away from Wisconsin. They're not, and a lot of it, some of it has to do with the Big Ten expanding and all that. But I think even if it was still the same Big Ten, they wouldn't be in it. They would not be in the bowl, and they wouldn't be considered any kind of a threat to win the Big Ten, maybe even to win the West. Like Iowa probably would have been the overwhelming favorite to win the West and all that good stuff. But Wisconsin unranked for the first time since 2016. And if you go back to 2016, the reason I think a lot of people were worried going into that season was because of the schedule. I mean, they opened up against a top 5 LSU team up at Lambeau. And then later on, they had games against top 10 teams in 3 straight weeks: Michigan State, Michigan, and Ohio State. And 2 of those were on the road. And you're like, oh my goodness. And then they went to Iowa the week after, or maybe it was they had a bye after that Ohio State game. And it was just, how do you deal with that? How do you overcome that? Well, you beat LSU, then you go to Michigan State and you beat them. And again, they turned out to be horrible. And then you put up a huge fight the next 2 weeks, and you go 2-2 in those games. And all of a sudden you're still not just ranked, but you're in like the top 15, even after those losses, because of how well you played. This feels like a similar situation, just in terms of not being ranked and having a schedule that currently boasts 3 top 10 teams and 5 top 25 teams.
Well, preseason rankings obviously are dependent a lot on perception of a program, like you're talking about. What do we know about this team going into the season? Well, historically, they've been this. And historically, if you want to go to recent history, they have not been very good. They're coming off back-to-back 7-6 seasons. The best year they've had in the last 5 years is the 9-4 year in 2021, where they blew their chance to go to the Big Ten championship game against Minnesota, right? In the regular season finale. So, and then you go to, well, who do they have and what is possible? And nobody knows the answer to that in terms of what is possible. But I think that they're rightfully unranked at this point. And I can also tell you, and talk to the players today, that they don't care about that, because at least that's what they're going to tell you to your face. It doesn't matter. They have to focus on what they have in that room and go out and win the games. And whether they're ranked or not is not going to change how difficult the challenge is. But because they do have a lot of opportunities, that's going to allow them to show what they can do, just like in 2016. And it's funny because you go back to that year and they started 1-2 just because of the way the schedule started. If I'm not mistaken, right?
In the Big Ten.
Big Ten, right? So they beat Michigan and obviously had those back-to-back losses. And there were a lot of those years, I feel like, where the Badgers had to kind of climb their way up. I mean, 2014, I think of too. They're just kind of like a forgotten team, and the pressure is completely off, and you can just go about your business. And obviously, they were much better than the record indicated. And maybe this year it will be something similar. If you do have some early season struggles, there are going to be a lot of opportunities down the stretch to show how much better you've gotten. If you lose against Alabama, if you lose against USC, you're going to be playing Penn State and Oregon at home in potential night games where you can probably shock the nation if you haven't played well up to that point. So There's a lot of opportunities for growth, but I think that's also scary because that means there's a lot of opportunities for potential failure where if you are not at the level that you need to be, you're going to get exposed.
Yeah, again, you go back some of the seasons where they have been unranked or lower or ranked lower have been some of their better years, like where there's not a whole lot of expected out of them. And I look at some of the other teams in that top 25, and Wisconsin garnered, I think it was, what was it, 15 or 16 votes or points. They were in the obviously receiving votes category. Nebraska was ahead of them, and I don't get that. They have not been to a bowl game since 2016. And I get like that there's some excitement around the program, obviously with Raiola coming in and looking like a fat Patrick Mahomes and like all that. Like I understand that excitement. Kid still hasn't played a game, and they, just like they did under the previous head coach, couldn't win close games last year. So that one, I mean, they only had like one more vote than Wisconsin, so it's not like it's a huge thing. But some teams get respect, and I don't understand it. And Nebraska is one of those teams. I don't understand it, but it's irrelevant for Wisconsin. The schedule, we've talked about Western Michigan. We haven't really talked about them, but we know that they're the first game. The second game is an interesting one because South Dakota, they're ranked 5th in the FCS. I don't think that is going to be necessarily maybe the walkover that some may project. South Dakota and some of the other FCS schools have given FBS schools some trouble. I'm normally thinking of Iowa here, but maybe that's just their offense being horrible. It's allowed the other team to stay in it. But that I don't know, especially with what's coming the following week. You just hope that if you're Wisconsin, if you're the coaching staff for Wisconsin, that you're just not overlooking that one. But overall, the schedule, I think this is as difficult a schedule as Wisconsin's ever had, and it doesn't get any easier next year either. I mean, these first 2 years of the Big Ten, of the new Big Ten, especially with Alabama as the non-conference opponent, makes it extremely, extremely difficult. But as you said, if they lose the Alabama game, it doesn't affect them Big Ten wise. But a win there, like a loss is what it's expected. A win changes things.
Yeah, I think if you want to go back and make the parallel to 2016, the win against LSU at Lambeau changed things because they all of a sudden became a ranked team, and you realized they were better than what people thought, and they could ride that momentum a little bit. Obviously, LSU turned out to be not of top 5 caliber that year, but wasn't a bad team. Just
I mean, they finished inside the top.
State.
They finished in the top 15 of the country. They just had to get rid of Les Miles. They just needed a new coach, and they ended up finishing inside the top 15. Won their bowl game, and I think they went 9-4 or something like that. With 2 of the losses being to Alabama and to Florida just by like single digits. So they were not a bad team that year. They were not Michigan State bad that year.
Yeah, I think obviously you could say this about every year, but there is a lot riding on what happens this year, especially for Luke Fickell, just because of the way year one went. And while I know people are supportive and feel good about the recruiting efforts they've made, you got to go win the games on the field. And so if you can show even incremental progress this year against a really tough schedule, then I think people feel better about what the future can look like for this program.
What does incremental growth look like for you?
And I feel like we've kind of touched on this subject a few different times. It's the way you compete in games, for starters. It's hard to put a definitive win number on what progress looks like. I mean, I think when we went over our picks, I had Wisconsin at 7-5 and you had 8-4. And if they go 8-4, that feels at least like incremental progress. Now it depends who you win and lose to, but you can't go out and play a team like Northwestern and be down 3 touchdowns at halftime and be completely embarrassed. Even if you have injuries, that's not an excuse. Every team has to deal with that. Losing to Indiana, a team that had not been good for several years. You got to be able to not only win those kinds of games, but be competitive and potentially win one of these games that people are talking about the Badgers can't win. So I think there's a lot to it. And statistically, you can look at all that stuff too. Where do they improve in certain areas so that you feel like you're building?
Do you remember that, not record, but that long streak where the only team they were an underdog to was Ohio State, like from the Miami Pinstripe Bowl game until I think the Iowa game in 2022? That may have been a toss-up. Either way, they're going to be an underdog in a lot of games this year, right? The Alabama game, the Oregon game, the Penn State game, the USC game, likely the game at Iowa, and likely, I guess we'll see how the season plays out, but perhaps at Nebraska as well. I can't remember the last time that they really faced this type of slate where a lot of people are not expecting them to win games like these. I don't know. 2016 was a little bit different. They had won 10 games the year before, right? Like they won 10 games. They beat USC in the bowl game. They had, there was change coming at different positions, losing the all-time leader in wins at Wisconsin and Joel Stabby is not easy to overcome. So there were certainly challenges there in 2016, but I think it was that schedule was probably more so what people were looking at as opposed to the team that was coming back.
They got a lot to prove this year. I think that's the simplest way to put it, on a number of fronts.
Yeah, and we'll see if they're able to do it. They will be back on the field Wednesday morning, and we'll get the chance to talk to the quarterbacks and offensive coordinator Phil Longo afterwards, and then we'll be here to discuss it tomorrow afternoon. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.